for years, the NCA has been a part of this fall conference. And again, this year, we're really pleased to have Henry Wallmeyer, who's the president and CEO of the NCA, and he's here to give us his perspective on some of the legal and legislative issues that are facing the private club community. For those of you who don't know, the NCA has served for over 50 years as a resource to clubs, and it's not only on the legal and legislative front, but on other issues that are facing clubs in the U.S. They have a staff of people as well who are available to provide counsel to you and to your boards on the issues that are facing your club, whether that be compliance or governance, tax, legislative issues. And they also, even though a lot of it is focused on the federal government, they're also able to provide counsel on a state and local basis. Henry started as CEO in September of 2015, and he's really worked hard to increase the influence of his organization on Capitol Hill. He began his association management career at the Club Managers Association of America. He directed the Premier Club Service and was Director of Industry Affairs, and he brings a wealth of knowledge on a number of issues facing the clubs today. Ladies and gentlemen, please welcome Henry Wallmeyer.
All right, sit down. That's all right. We're going to have some fun today, because I know this is what you want to do at 8:30 in the morning, especially after some of you sat in traffic, is talk about government relations and all the fun things that are happening in Washington, D.C. So I'm going to try to make it as exciting as I can for us. But I just say that I am excited to be here, and maybe a little too excited. As I was leaving yesterday, and I was packing up to come up here, and had the opportunity to stay at one of the overnight rooms here, beautiful rooms. Albert's done a wonderful job here with renovations at the club. But as I was packing up to come up, and I just sort of had a little extra, bounce in my step, my wife was looking at me and she's like, "What are you so excited about?" So I looked at my wife and I said, "Did you ever think in your wildest dreams that I would be able to go back for a second time to speak to the MGA President's Council?" One time fine, but they invited me back as a second time, so I feel pretty good about that. My wife looks at me and she says, "You're never in my wildest dreams." So that's what happens in my home life, but so we're here. So I'm excited to be here. We're going to make this as interesting as possible. Please, if you have any questions that come up as I'm going through something, don't hesitate to shout it out, raise your hand, do whatever. I'd rather have us talk about what you want to talk about or what questions you have than what I've got on my slides, which I think is what you should hear about or what you might want to talk about. So we're going to have some fun, make this interesting as possible as we talk about government relations. So the agenda today is, I'm going to try to take you past that point. There's an interesting sign in the hallway up on Capitol Hill. Those big bad lobbyists, they don't want them past this point. But we're going to take you past this point. We're going to show you what's going on in DC, what's happening. Or on the second agenda, potentially, we could talk about Villanova. I am a graduate of Villanova. We have won 2 out of the last 3 national championships. I can go on and on about this if we'd like, since we're not too far away. But I think we have to stick to what we talked about in terms of government relations. So who is the National Club Association? Again, Todd, thank you very much for having me here, for talking about that and what we do. In short, we are the lobbyists for private clubs in Washington, D.C. We're the only organization that does lobby on behalf of private clubs. I have on staff a lobbyist and a lawyer, Brad Steele. You might have heard him speak at other events. And that's pretty unusual for an association our size with only 8 full-time staff, that I do have 1 full-time dedicated person to lobby. And I always kid Brad because he is a lawyer, he's a lobbyist. And I don't know how you introduce yourself to people with either one of those, because nobody likes either one of those. But in Washington, D.C., it's a necessary evil. We have to have somebody who is representing the private club industry on Capitol Hill. Because if we don't, there's going to be nobody representing us, and we're going to be left behind. So that's what we do. And we do it, and we're very proud of what we do. And so I know outside of the Beltway, people talk about, oh, they're lobbyists, or they do that, or it's bad in there. It is. DC's not the best place to be in terms of esprit de corps and what's happening in terms of government. But you need to have somebody representing you, and that's what we do at the National Club Association. So let's talk about that advocacy. We are there to defend, protect, and advance the interests and well-being of private clubs. Located right there in Washington, D.C., our office is at 15th and M, which is about 4 blocks away from the White House, and then on the other side, about 10 blocks away from the Capitol. So we're in the thick of it. And so we're there on Capitol Hill to make sure that the voice is heard, but not just on Capitol Hill, in the agencies, in the state houses, like Todd mentioned, in the courthouses, anything that is affecting private clubs. We need to make sure that the private club industry's voice is heard. We need to stand up on that soapbox and say, hey, this is what's happening. This is what's happening to the employees of private clubs if legislation is passed or not passed. This is what's happening to the local community. This is how it's going to affect it. And a lot of things that we do is the education of staff, of congressmen, of senators about the private club industry. Because, as you probably all are aware, people looking into the private club industry from the outside, they don't necessarily have the best view of it. So they're going to write something or think something negative about it. And we need to change that perception. And that's what we do on Capitol Hill. It's a lot of education. How many people do clubs employ? How much do they contribute to the local economy? All these things that are very, very important that people don't think about when they think about private clubs, because private clubs are small businesses, and that's how we go about doing this. Saying you've got these small businesses in your district that are employing this many people, that are paying this much in taxes, and this is why it's important, why we need to be supportive of the issues that matter to us. All right, so let's talk about Washington, D.C. There's one good thing happening in Washington, D.C. We've got the Stanley Cup. That's about it. Nothing else good is happening in D.C., especially the fact the Nationals aren't any good and Bryce Harper's probably going to be leaving. So that's the good thing. What's the troubling thing? The balance of power. Right now in Washington, D.C., it's very, very divided. And I've seen anybody who watches the news at any amount of time or anything, you know how deeply divided Washington, D.C. is. It's a very small margin in the Senate, a small margin in the House as well. So because of that, what is happening in DC? What's getting done to make this a better place for clubs? Right now, nothing. And this is my favorite photo of DC because this is an actual interstate. As you're coming in 395 from Virginia into Washington, DC, there are exits if you driving into the Capitol for the House side of the Capitol or the Senate side of the Capitol. But this just shows that there's nothing happening in DC but gridlock. I mean, this is just a great, great photo that represents what's going on in your nation's capital. So with that, there are some few things that happened. We'll talk about it on the legislative side, then we'll get in and talk about some on the regulatory side, and then we'll talk about some stuff that's happened in the states as well. And as I'm going through this, also notice that nothing is going to be happening between now and Election Day, which is 28 days from today, 4 weeks from today. November 6th is Election Day. Nothing is going to be happening because Congress has gone home, because they were off for the entire month of August. They came in for 2 weeks in September, went home for a week in September, came in for a week in September, and then went home for the entire month of October so they could campaign for the November elections. It's a pretty good schedule, if you can get it. So everything that's happening in Congress has already happened. Nothing's going to be happening between now and November 6th. They'll come back November 7th for the lame duck session, and then we'll see what happens up until December 7th, because that's when potentially the government can shut down, but we'll talk about that. So what has happened? Tax reform. Not a lot dealing with private clubs, except for potentially where it did have the business meals and entertainment deductions at 50%. In the new tax law that was passed, that takes away that deduction for the entertainment expenses at a club, which could be golf. You can still deduct the 50% for the meals, but that entertainment is no longer there. Now, there's a separate discussion of whether somebody should be conducting business at a club and writing that off as a business expense. That's a whole other discussion. But in terms of this tax bill that was passed, that's one of the things that affects clubs. The other thing that the House did before they left was they tried to make these tax cuts permanent. A lot of people probably don't know that they do expire by 2025. A lot of this has to do with just minutia in terms of how bills can be passed and how they're scored and how it can actually be done. And it was only done for 10 years. And so it's set to expire in 2025. So the Republicans in the House passed legislation to make it permanent. It went over to the Senate. There was no chance that it would ever pass in the Senate. It was more of a messaging bill by the Republicans, so they could go back and campaign and say, hey, we're trying to make these tax cuts permanent, which I'm sure most people thought that these tax cuts were permanent when they were first instituted. So it's a lot of those types of things is what happens in Washington, D.C. They're not really doing things for the betterment of the country, or for the betterment of industry or business or clubs. It's a lot of, okay, what can we do so that I can then go back and run for re-election? because on November 7th, the first thing that especially every congressman is going to do, and a third of the Senate is going to be doing, is looking to run for re-election in 2 years and seeing how that they make sure that they can get elected again in 2020. All right, so healthcare fixes. This is something where obviously President Trump wanted to come in and repeal and replace. That did not happen, so now you're sort of having to work around the edges. Okay, are there things, has to be bipartisan fix, that can help with what the Affordable Care Act or Obamacare, is. Some things that we supported and worked on, pushing back taxes such as the Cadillac and health insurance tax, and then also medical device tax. So we're seeing that those, again, they're just getting pushed down the road. So we're looking to work on permanent changes for some of these. Some others that we're working on, the STARS Act, which just, again, it's working around the edges of the bill. It simplifies what a seasonal worker is and a seasonal employee, because it's basically the exact same definition of these two people, but it's listed differently in the bill. So we're trying to say, okay, well, it just needs to be listed as one definition throughout the entire bill. Again, a relatively easy fix. Should be able to be done. Doesn't, there's no cost associated with it. It's just cleaning up this bill. Reporting requirement overhauls, again, looking to make those a little more cleaner. And then Representative Orlowski, the lady in the green coat there, representative from Indiana, we're working with her, and she's working to push back the full-time employee to 40 hours per week. Because in the Affordable Care Act, it was like 30 hours per week. And we've all known that full-time employee is 40 hours per week. So we're working with her on that to be able to do that. And this is an opportunity for us to meet with her on National Golf Day. So these are opportunities that what we're doing, we say going up on the hill and meeting with people. So she is aware of our issues with it, where she knows we're supporting her, and that's how ideally we can get things done. But like I said, there's just going to be no appetite in Congress to do a overhaul of Obamacare. So basically, we have it, and so okay, are there things that can be done that can be beneficial to the private club industry or the businesses that can be corrected or fixed on that. Also, H-2B visa program. Just a quick question: how many people here use H-2B visa program for employees? All right, very good. So that's important to folks in this room. We know, especially in a tight economy like this, how important it is. And I know during our panel after this, we'll talk about workforce issues. We'll talk more specifically about this. But I want to talk about the legislative side of it. 66,000 is the cap right now for the worker H-2B visas that can come in. We worked to expand that. It did get expanded by 15,000. We're very happy with that. In fact, maybe a whole lot more, but you take what you can get. And those were taken up right away when those were made available. So this is a big issue. It's something that we are continuing to work on. And right there with Representative Andy Harris, this is another thing that we do in DC. You try to get pictures with congressmen and senators as much as you can to show that you're actually working, and they like that. But Representative Harris is a very big proponent of expanding the H-2B visa program. He represents a crabbing district in southern Maryland. And so his constituents, his crabbing companies, need to bring in these foreign seasonal workers to be able to pick crabs for the 3, 4, 5, 6 months, that it's crab season. He's not able to find local people to do it because it is tough labor. He's not finding people to do it because it's part-time, it's seasonal, they don't want to do that. They're looking for full-time work. So he is a very big proponent of expanding the H-2B visa. He's got a bill in, or amendment to a bill, the spending bill for Homeland Security. The only issue is, and this is where we can get into a little bit of inside politics, before Congress did recess, they passed 5 of the 12 spending bills, because Congress was due to go out, or the fiscal year ended at the end of September. But they only passed 5 of the 12 spending bills. Within one of those bills was a language that keeps the government running, a continuing resolution until December 7th of this year. So, one of the 7 of the 12 bills that did not get passed was Department of Homeland Security. And the reason that did not get passed is because they have not put it to the president yet, because the president wants funding for the border wall in that bill. Unfortunately, this would be the only bill that also we could put additional or increases in the H-2B visa issue. So that's going to be tricky to be able to put that into that bill and then to get that bill passed, because that's where we're looking at, the president has stated, and it very likely could happen that if he doesn't get funding for his border wall December 7th, we're looking at a shutdown of the government. And the president threatened to do it the first time. He didn't do it. He was mad at himself for what he had to pass in terms of the spending. So I wouldn't put it past him to say this time, nope, we're going to, we're shutting down the government until one, he can get us, funding for the wall, and then two, other spending can come in line. So it's going to be interesting to see what happens. And it was nice enough for Congress to make sure that they put that continuing resolution until December 7th, which got them past election and, a month past the election. So with that, what is happening 4 weeks from today? It's going to be challenging for the Republicans in the House to keep their majority. This is completely different than what we were thinking 2 years ago when we saw the president win the election, and then how many people across all the states, Republicans were taking additional seats in state houses, and then also within the House, and keeping it in the Senate. And so this is different, and obviously a lot of things have happened over the last couple of years. But then also, a lot of things can still happen in the next month, and we'll get to that in a little bit later. But this is what we've seen over the last couple of months as we've looked at this to say, okay, well, what's going to be, on November 7th, what are we looking at in terms of a Congress that we need to try to work with to try to advance the private club industry. So right now you're looking at Republicans controlling the House. The prevailing knowledge is that Republicans will lose the House. I don't know, you look at prevailing knowledge 2 years ago when everybody said that Senator Clinton was going to win, and obviously that did not happen. So you sort of have to take that, I don't say with a grain of salt, because there's a lot of data and a lot of research that goes into this, but know that that's not always what's going to happen. I think it's going to basically depend on who has the energized base that gets out there for that midterm election. But saying that, historically in midterm elections, the party that has the White House always loses seats during that midterm election. So that would be the Republicans this year. We've also got this year where 40 Republicans are retiring from the House, an unheard of number, because usually once people get elected, they like the job, they want to stay there, and unfortunately they end up staying there for life for some of them. And so they're retiring. Some are, running for other positions, whether it be, federally in terms of Senate or, state positions, back home. But a lot of Republicans are retiring because I think that they sort of see the writing on the wall and they say, you know what, I definitely do not want to be part of a minority party after having been part of a majority party. While I've served in Congress, I don't want to have to deal with this, and it's just getting too divisive in Washington, D.C. So you're seeing that. Last time we saw that large of a number was 28 Democrats in 1994 when the Republicans and Newt Gingrich took over the House. So you're looking at 12 more than that right now. So you've got that. Other things such as Pennsylvania, a couple of House districts were redrawn because the judge said that they were unconstitutional, how they were drawn, how they were gerrymandered, and those seats will flip from Republicans to Democrats, no question about it. We've seen a lot of close special elections over the last 2 years. We've also seen some that Republicans should have won easily that they did not. And then you're looking at Republicans are defending a lot of the toss-up seats, those seats that are basically even right now. Republicans are defending 28 out of the 30 of those. So just looking at this, Republicans have a steeper hill to climb to be able to maintain that House than would have been thought 2 years ago. And just real quickly, if you're interested, on election nights, you're looking at a couple of House races that might be a harbinger, of how things are going to go for the entire House. Peter Oscom in Illinois and Leonard Lance here in New Jersey. And that R2 means that historically that congressional district has voted for a Republican 2% more than a Democrat in presidential elections. Just sort of try to give you a little sense of the flavor of that district. And so, you'll see something where he won, that district by 17 or 19 points. Senator Clinton won it by 7. So again, these are districts that are swing districts and out there voting. Same thing for Representative Lance. And then just a couple more real quick. One in Michigan and one in Kentucky. And I will say about the one in Kentucky, Kentucky always seems to have their results ready to go right away. Right at 7 o'clock, they're always one of the first states to announce whether presidential election or anything else. So that's one to look at to see Representative Barr if he wins re-election. Because the Democrats have done a real good job, of recruiting candidates and putting up very strong candidates in a lot of these races. And so that's one of the things that's making it, closer as well. They did an outstanding job, of going out and finding candidates that they wanted to put up that could put up good fights against these incumbents. So there's just a couple others that might show you what's going to happen at the end of the night. And then in the Senate, same thing. It's going to be challenging for Republicans to keep control of the Senate. You would not have thought that 2 years ago, because Senate 26, they're trying to hold 26 seats. Republicans are only trying to hold 9. But it's just, it's changed in these last 2 years. President Trump had some huge wins in some states that have Democrat senators, and so you're seeing you think that those Democrats would be very vulnerable, but even in 3 of those, West Virginia, North Dakota, Montana, those Democrat senators, are leading in the polls. And so again, it's just all going to come down to all politics is local. What's going to happen? What are they doing for their constituents? And then you also saw with the Kavanaugh vote, where Joe Manchin said that he was voting for Justice Kavanaugh on that. Heidi Heitkamp from Montana said that she was not. So they had to make those political decisions based on a lot on their reelection, not necessarily what they thought if he should or should not have been appointed as a justice. So it's going to be interesting, and again, even seats that you think would be heavily safe Republican seats, Arizona, Nevada, Tennessee, those are a lot closer than what we thought. But so you got all that, again, this is what we looked for over the last couple of months as we're looking at these things and tracking them. But like I say, in politics, a week is forever, a month is forever. And what we've seen over the last couple of weeks, with the Kavanaugh effect, the Democrats, bringing this out, and what it has done, it has energized the Republican base, because we saw earlier that the Democratic base was energized. They were coming out large numbers in the primaries. They were excited. They were coming out large numbers in the special elections, and so they've been excited. But now, with what's happened, on Capitol Hill with the hearings for Justice Kavanaugh, we're seeing that the Republicans have picked up 12 points since July. This was a poll taken October 1st, so a week ago, so on Monday. So after all the hearings had been completed, before he was, sworn in. So you see the Republicans have picked up 12 points in terms of they think these elections are now very important because of that. And then just to break it down between Democrats and Republicans, Republican men and women both jumped up by 12. Where they got the 12. Democrats, the men jumped up there, but then actually the women now have dropped by a couple points, which I just thought was very interesting on that. So again, it's a lifetime. We've still got another month until these elections go. Who knows what could happen? Maybe what's going to be the turn, or what's going to cause the election to turn next month hasn't even happened yet. They don't call them October surprises for nothing. So. This is what we're looking at right now, but I would not put any money on anything as to what's going to happen. I just talk a little bit about our club hack. This is how we are able to support those candidates that support our issues. We can give contributions to the campaigns for senators, congressmen, even state senators or state delegates like Bill Frick in Maryland, as we were working on a tax assessment issue there. This is just a small list of who we supported. I'm going to put here some of the local ones, but again, Representative Harris, Representative Wallmeyer, who we're working on bills. So this is how we can say we're trying to make a difference and we're doing it, because that's a question that we get a lot is, well, what are you really doing and how is this happening? Well, in Washington, D.C., it helps if you can support those candidates that support our issues, and that's what we do through our Political Action Committee. All right, so let's talk a little bit about the regulatory side. That was legislative overtime rule. This was a rule that was in place right before the end of the Obama administration, which would have raised the exemption from $24,000 to $48,000. So if you were making above $24,000, you were exempt from overtime, that was going to be raised to $48,000. That was stopped by a Texas court. The Department of Labor has now removed that rule. We are working with the Department of Labor to say, okay, $24,000 is probably a little low, so let's find something that's a little more palatable than doubling it overnight, which is what that $24,000 to $48,000 would have done. So now we're working with the Department of Labor, along with a lot of other groups, and it looks like it's probably going to be around that $33,000 a year is going to be that exemption line, for that. But with that, there's still that white-collar exemption. So just because somebody makes $33,000 or more a year, if this new rule is in effect, does not mean that they would be automatically exempt. They would need to make sure that they fall into one of these other categories, whether executive, administrative, or professional exemption, on that. So this is where you can work with your HR departments if you have one, ideally, or your department heads, to make sure that the job descriptions or the roles and responsibilities of that position can fit into one of these categories. So you can say, yes, you're making over this amount, but then you are also, you fall into one of these categories. National Labor Relations Board, with this, with President Trump, been able to turn this board into more of a neutral arbiter, which is what we wanted it to be and what it should be. It was a very activist board because the president has 3 people from his or her party on the board, and there's 2 people from the opposition party. And so, and the idea is for this board to, just be that arbiter, say, okay, well, what is good, for business as well as for employees. Before, we'd seen that was very, very heavily weighted to the side of employees and very bad for business. So we've done that, and they've done some things that have helped in terms of especially unionization, where they've overturned the micro-union decision, which is where even small groups within a group of employees could unionize. This all started, I think it was, I'm not sure if it was Macy's or one of the department stores where the people who worked at the fragrance counter wanted to unionize, and so the whole entire store, they just wanted to do it because that's what their their group was. So they've helped overturn that, because you can imagine if just the chefs or the cooks or the waitstaff or the grounds crew wanted to do that. Another thing that they've done, the joint employer decision, they overturned it. It's been reinstated on technicality, but we're looking to work, and that will be overturned again. But what that does is that would make a club liable for a third-party infraction. So if you hired somebody to come, and whether they are doing tree work or extermination or something that you're hiring a third party for, and if that third party had problems, then the club could be liable as well. The way that they were, the previous NLRB was looking at it, but now the new NLRB is saying no, the club must have direct control over that employee, and they do not. And so that's only just because they're hiring a third party doesn't mean that they have direct control over that employee. So again, making sure that clubs are not put in a position that could bring financial harm to them on that. And then again, some of the other unionization stuff on here. WOTUS, again, another rule that was put in place at the end of the Obama administration to help clean up, according to them, clean up our water, our streams. Unfortunately, the rule was so badly written, nobody knew what it was helping to clean up and what the streams were, what it was. It was a situation where, and a lot of us have had a lot of rain this summer. If you get a big puddle or something forming on, a fairway, that could have been considered a protected body of water, which then no fertilizers, pesticides, or anything could be, flowing into that. So it was very poorly written. It was done, I think, very quickly just to get it in place. It was stopped by a Texas court. A lot of these things were filed in Texas courts, being more friendly to the businesses. And so what we're now doing is saying, okay, we want to work with the EPA on this, and that's fine. Again, golf courses are one of the most sustainable things that are out there, and any superintendent will tell me, and I'll say it, the people who, their homes that are surrounding the golf course, they're much worse for the environment in terms of pesticides and what they're putting on their grounds than what a golf course is. But people will just look at golf courses and country clubs and those big, bad, horrible places and say, well, we need to do something about it. So we want to work with them and say, okay, well, let's come up with a rule that makes sense for everybody, but also so we know what that rule is, so we know how to follow it. And we can say, okay, sure, just tell us what to do, and we'll be happy to do it, whereas the previous rule did not on that. So there'll be some more on that shortly. Employee independent contractor classification. This is another big issue that we're following very closely and trying to do a lot of work on. The Obama administration had an economic realities test that was to determine if someone was an independent contractor or if they should be classified as an employee of the club. The Trump administration is not following that test. Department of Labor is not, going after that. But what it is Department of Labor is not going to be a major concern, but what we're going to see is in suits that are filed against the club. And we've seen some, in this area, there's been some down in Florida, there's been one in Georgia, where people are suing the club saying, I should have been treated as an employee, but I was treated as an independent contractor. And it's going to be very tough to continue to classify people as independent contractors, because in California, they've come up with their new ABC test. And so a lot of times things that start in California, fortunately or unfortunately, trickle their way across the rest of the country. So we're just looking at some of the things that California is doing. It's going to make it very difficult and to be able to check all those boxes and say, yes, this person is an independent contractor, and so that's how we can continue to classify them. So with that, so what's a club can do? What can a club do to make sure that independent contractors that they have are properly classified? Do not have an independent contractor attend staff meetings, ask for time off, do separate work around the club, wear the club's logo. Again, these are the rules that are out there. Whether you use these or not, that's up to you. But what we're saying is, to help identify someone as an independent contractor, these should be done. Also, should not set their prices, set their schedule, or pair them with members. So that is, if somebody's going to come back to you because of a lawsuit that says, well, we did all these things, we did do all these things, that's what they're looking at right there. So what are your options, with that for independent contractors? Again, you can have independent contractors, have the clubs or the club members hire them themselves. I know there's some technology that are out there. There's some apps that where a member can hire the caddy directly, so the club can stay out of that process. Or you can make the independent contractors employees. If it does suit the club. Again, this is all dependent on whatever works best for you and your club. If they are employees and if they're not, caddy, then they can do other things, at the club. They can be that, that ambassador for the club, in other parts or other areas. And so that's something that you might want to look at as well. All right, we'll talk about state issues real quick here. Like I said, we are, a federal lobbying organization. That does not mean that we will not help clubs when there are state issues that are, very prevalent and that need our help. What I'm trying to do as I grow the association is my next hire will be someone who can do state lobbying for us, so that we can have a voice on the Hill as well as a voice out in the states, because we're seeing there's a lot more activity that way. So with that, a lot of property tax issues, especially here in New York. I'm sure you're all familiar with this. The New York State Club Association did a great job of identifying a bill that was going to be introduced. It never got introduced on the House side. It did get introduced on the Senate side here in New York. That would have changed the processes for grievances here in New York. It did not go anywhere this year. We fully expect that it's going to come back in 2019. So anticipate that you get to be part of that as well. In Maryland, a state delegate wanted to bring more revenue into the state of Maryland. So he said, well, let's just go tax private clubs, on their property tax. Let's increase it. And in Maryland, they did it, there was an agreement. Club could sign a 50-year agreement to be only taxed at a certain amount if they, promised not to sell, not to sell their land or not to develop their land, because they wanted to try to keep as much open space as possible and limit the, the suburban, crawl and sprawl that were in a lot of these country clubs in Montgomery County, Maryland, which is right outside of Washington, D.C. And again, it was very poorly done. There was not a lot of thought process put into it, so we worked with our clubs in Maryland and was able to get the bill defeated 7-17, which was great. But we fully expect that he's going to introduce it next year, and again, trying to pit private clubs against the rest of ordinary citizens in the state. And then in Maryland, in Virginia, it was very interesting how there's one county in Virginia, Arlington County, that taxes their clubs completely differently than the rest of the 51 counties in the state of Virginia. And so there was a law that was passed that said Arlington County has to be, clubs in Arlington County have to be treated the same way as all the clubs in the rest of the country, or the rest of the state. And the governor ended up vetoing that bill because it was from a very Democratic county. He's a Democratic governor, that was his constituents. But what he did say was to the county, was say, go work out an agreement, and come back with some type of solution. So they did, so they lowered their tax assessment, still higher than what it is compared to the rest of the state, lower than what it was before. And then they were given, a 4-year reprieve on having to pay any taxes on that for what they had paid in the past. So we were able to, again, work with them and work with, the governor show our support for these clubs. So those types of things that we can do on state issues, and that we'd love to do on state issues, to work with clubs, to work with the local, state golf associations or state club associations, however we can to make sure that the voice of the club is being heard. And then just in South Carolina, a recent court case came down where there's 2 members of a club had equity membership. They resigned their membership and they stopped paying their membership dues, stopped paying their food and beverage minimums. And so the club sued them and said, no, until a suitable replacement is found, you still owe us this. So they took them to court, and the circuit court said that's correct. They are responsible for this. They appealed. The appellate court, not really sure how they saw this, but they said that the documents weren't straightforward enough that they did not owe this. They could resign their membership and not have to pay until someone else was found. Went to the Supreme Court maybe just last month, rendered a verdict that said that yes, the club is correct. Everything was in place, what they needed to do, to make sure that they were still responsible for paying their dues and the food and beverage minimum and other expenses until a suitable replacement was found. And of course, unfortunately, when they bought into the property, home values went down, and so it was tougher to get to find a suitable replacement. But it was good that the courts did rule in favor of the club on that, because a lot of times what courts will do, they'll look to see, okay, what's the precedent on this? What's happened before? And so that's why it's very important for clubs to be successful in cases like this. So that's what I've got on government relations, on legislative regulatory fronts. I'll just do a couple minutes because I want to try to stay on time as much as possible. I'll just do some complete self-promotional things here, things that might be of interest to you guys. Our National Club Conference will be in Washington, D.C., April 28th through the 30th. And this is where we bring together about 175 club leaders. So it is for managers as well as presidents and board members coming to the club. Currently lined up for speakers, we've got Tucker Carlson from Fox News, David Rubenstein from the Carlyle Group, runs a very, very large private equity firm, but is also a huge philanthropist in Washington, D.C. He's given a lot of money back to the city in terms of paying to repair the Washington Monument. He bought the Magna Carta and donated it to Smithsonian. So we've done a lot of really interesting things with the the resources that he's been able to secure. And one thing we're very, very excited about is that recently retired Justice Kennedy, who all this Kavanaugh thing happened because of, he's going to be addressing us from the courtroom of the Supreme Court. So we're going to be busing everybody up to the Supreme Court. We'll be sitting in the courtroom, having him address us about the court, how it works, about the court building itself, and then we'll be doing a reception with him outside in the Great Hall of the Supreme Court for an hour. So that should be something very interesting. We'll be announcing more speakers on that. But I want to mention that because it is something where we do encourage general managers to come and bring their presidents, because this is more of a executive level conference, and so providing insight to from people who are executives in their own industries. And so also we're now partnering with McMahon and Club Resort Business on on the Excellence in Club Management Awards. This is great for us to be able to recognize those managers and even those up-and-coming rising stars, who are outstanding in their field. And so there are 4 different categories. Deadline is the end of this month, so I'd encourage general managers, if you have a Rising Star. I know Kevin Vitale from Baltusrol, his manager, won the Rising Star Award this year. And also presidents, if you want to recognize the work that your general manager or chief operating officer has done, this is a wonderful opportunity to do it. So they do expire at the end of October to get those in. And then also Eloquence Magazine. This is now our official lifestyle magazine. Some of you might have received it. This goes out to all of our members. Whoever's on our roster received our club director. Would also get Eloquence Magazine. I've got a copy of it here if anybody would like to see it. But it is a very, very impressive. It's basically like a coffee table book into a magazine. But what they're going to do is they're going to celebrate the private club lifestyle. It gives us an opportunity to really focus on clubs, what they do, and how they are important to society, but also a lot of interesting stories about clubs that we wouldn't normally feature in some of our other publications that are more geared towards operations or governance or trends. And so if you're interested, we focused or featured Sleepy Hollow Country Club in this issue. If you're interested in having your club featured, let me know, and we can definitely pass that along to the editor. And this also, we allow, if a club is interested, we can add your members to the mailing list so that all of your members can receive the magazine at no cost to the club. It's just a benefit to the club. And we won't see that list, the magazine won't see that list. That will get sent to a third-party mail house. So nobody will see the membership list at your club if you're interested in that. So yeah, available to all clubs. So in conclusion, so everybody's like, woohoo, all right. Let me know if there's anything that I can do for you. I'll be here for the next panel. I think my cards are out on the table. There's information on the membership. If you're not a member, we'd love to have you. Love to have you support the work that we're doing. Because as I, get an objection all the time, clubs will say, well, you're gonna, still lobby for us, for the industry, whether we join you or not. And that's true. We're gonna still do, what we're, created to do. But we're not going to do it nearly as well, we're not going to do it nearly as successfully if we don't have the numbers, in terms of the number of members, if we don't have the resources that we need. It's a whole lot easier for me to go up on Capitol Hill and meet with one of these congressmen or senator and say, we represent 800 or 1,000 clubs that employ this many people. And Senator, you have this many clubs in your state that I represent, or Congressman, you have this many clubs in your district that I represent. And the employees, and this is what it is. So that's what we need. We need the numbers, we need the stories, we need your support to continue building our presence on Capitol Hill and being that voice of the industry. So thank you very much.